Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling what's gotta be the most famous and, honestly, the most fiercely debated milestone in all of personal finance. We're gonna completely break down the concept of saving your first $100,000, what hitting that number actually means for your future, and most importantly, how you can actually get there. Okay, let's dive right into this with a totally classic, punchy quote from the late, legendary investor Charlie Munger. Back in the late 90s, he supposedly told a crowd, the first $100,000 is a bitch, but you gotta do it. And you know what? If you've ever felt like that initial climb to save and invest money is just absolutely grueling, well, this quote completely validates your experience. Just getting off the starting block and building up that initial chunk of wealth is literally the hardest part. But reading that quote today immediately brings up a massive question, right? It's a debate that's constantly blowing up across modern personal finance communities, especially on places like Reddit. And that question is this famous financial milestone actually still true today? I mean, think about it. The purchasing power of our money and the crazy rates of inflation have changed dramatically since Munger dropped that truth bomb back in the 90s. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer to figure this all out. We'll start with the first 100K rule itself. Then we'll look at the math of compounding, adjust things for modern inflation, clearly define what actually counts as an invested asset, and wrap up by breaking down the psychological barriers standing in your way. All right, first up, the first 100K rule and why it's such an uphill climb. So why is starting from zero notoriously difficult? Well, it's because in the very beginning, your financial growth relies almost entirely on your own sweat, your own labor, and your own paycheck contributions. The market isn't really helping you out much yet. You're doing all the heavy lifting yourself. But eventually, you trigger what we call the snowball effect. This is that magical process where early, difficult savings begin to generate their own earnings, eventually creating a totally self-sustaining cycle of wealth. It's like rolling a tiny snowball down a giant hill. And honestly, the 100K rule is way less about the literal dollar amount of 100 grand and so much more about reaching that specific inflection point. It's the exact moment your money stops just sitting around, puts on a hard hat, and literally starts working for you. Now, what's really interesting here is section 2, the math of compounding, or as I like to call it, coasting downhill. Let's look at how the math actually plays out over time and transitions us from that grueling uphill climb to a much easier downhill coast. Take a look at this data directly from Bankrate. Let's say you contribute $500 a month and get an average annual return of 7%. Look right there at year 5. You've contributed $30,000 of your own hard-earned money, but you've earned less than $5,000 in pure interest. I know it feels painfully slow, but you gotta stay with it. By year 10, you've put in $60,000, and suddenly your interest earned jumps to over $20,000. Now check out year 20. You've put in $120,000 out of pocket, but your total value, it's nearly $246,000. That means your pure interest earned by year 20 is over $125,000. I really want to emphasize this massive figure because it makes the abstract, kind of math-heavy concept of compound growth incredibly tangible. By year 20, the interest generated by your portfolio completely dwarfs the initial monthly contributions you put in. At this point, your money is literally making more money than you're contributing. It's a total game changer. Which brings us to section 3, adjusting for modern inflation. Let's shift our discussion back to that modern debate from those Reddit threads we talked about earlier. What is the actual real-world purchasing power of Charlie Munger's 90s quote in today's economy? Because let's be real, 100 grand simply doesn't buy what it used to. If you run the actual numbers, $100,000 in the late 1990s is mathematically equivalent to roughly $200,000 to $220,000 today. So strictly speaking, the new financial milestone should technically be over 200K. However, and this is key, the general consensus across personal finance communities is that the original $100,000 mark remains an absolutely crucial, highly motivating psychological barrier for savers. Hitting 6 figures just feels incredibly rewarding to the human brain, even if the purchasing power has shifted over the decades. So the crucial point we really need to focus on is this awesome concept called escape velocity. This is a brilliant framework heavily discussed on Reddit. Escape velocity is the exact point when your portfolio returns finally exceed your annual savings rate. Think about that for a second. Your true milestone isn't some fixed arbitrary number that applies to everyone. It's uniquely based on you. For example, if you save $10,000 a year and your portfolio grows large enough that it returns more than $10,000 a year in interest, boom, you've hit escape velocity. The math has officially taken over. Moving right along to section 4, defining your invested assets. Now, when people talk about reaching this incredible milestone, we absolutely need to make a vital distinction about what counts and, just as importantly, what doesn't. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference. On one side, we have invested assets. We're talking things like your 401k, your IRAs, and your brokerage accounts. On the other side, we have net worth, which includes your car, the equity in your house, and your checking accounts. To actually achieve that compounding snowball effect we've been talking about, the money must be in those growth vehicles, the invested assets. You are simply not going to achieve escape velocity with money just sitting around in a zero-interest checking account or tied up in a depreciating asset like a car.
Finally, we have Section 5, breaking the psychological barriers. Look, we know the math is actually quite simple, right? But the execution, that's the hard part. So let's look at the psychological hurdles detailed by the experts over at Bankrate. The absolute biggest hurdle is mastering delayed gratification. This is the immense, sometimes agonizing patience required to invest for decades without touching the money. It means resisting the urge to spend on immediate wants, and yeah, that definitely includes that $7 daily iced coffee. Bankrate points out that overcoming the fear of losing money in a volatile market, avoiding paralysis by analysis when you're faced with way too much information online, and truly committing to delayed gratification, those are the true hidden secrets to finally reaching your first 100K. Let's move to and see how this builds into an actionable playbook. Bankrate outlines 3 proven, straightforward steps to effectively navigate that grueling uphill climb. Number 1, start early. Even if it's just a tiny amount, time is literally your biggest ally here. Number 2, stay consistent. You just have to keep investing even when the market gets super volatile and scary. And number 3, diversify. Spread your investments out so you can smartly mitigate your risk. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to take away today. What is your personal escape velocity? Seriously, I challenge you to look at your own finances today, calculate exactly how much you save a year, and figure out the exact portfolio size you need for your compounding interest to finally out-earn your own savings rate. The math is proven, the milestone is totally waiting for you, and now it's completely up to you to take control of your financial journey. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.